Hello and welcome to another Spirit Island video. Today I'm going to be going over the Adversary Habsburg mining expedition and just talking a lot about like all of my experiences with it, like a bunch of strategy tips, things like that, like breaking down how the Adversary works, how best to play against that, and like just various quirks about it. So, Habsburg Mining Expedition, I believe at base difficulty, so difficulty 0, the devs have said that this is 1 difficulty at level 0, and it goes up to 10 difficulty at level 6. So, this is going to be like about average, according to the devs, of a difficulty for a level 6 adversary, not like 8 for Sweden, or maybe Sweden's 9, I forget. I know Prussia's somewhere. I think Prussia's at around 10, but also not difficulty 11 like England or Russia. I think that this difficulty number is actually a bit high. I think that I would put it more at a 9, but I also think that like it is an adversary that can be unintuitive to play well. I think that there's a lot of play patterns and a lot of depth to it, where you can get a lot of value from being from like playing specifically to counter HME, as opposed to just like letting HME do its things and then like responding to that. So yeah, let's get into the adversary a bit. So first of all, we have this additional loss condition right here, in which this says land stripped bare at the end of the fast phase. The invaders win if any land has at least 8 total invaders or blight combined. So this is very similar to England's loss condition at first glance, right? England says if there's ever 7 buildings in a land, then you lose, the invaders win. However, it is a lot less unforgiving than England, because you have this only ever checked on the fast phase. You can never lose to this in the middle of a turn. You always have like the fast phase in order to deal with all of your loss condition lands. Whereas England, like an extra build from an event might just screw you over. Also, it means that you can't like, you know, in the middle of a power, like say you have a power that like is push 4 towns, you can't do that and then like cast down, or I guess more realistically, blazing renewal into the land that you push 4 towns into, like stack things up and then kill them all at once. That's not a thing you could do with England, but you can do that with HME because it only checks at the end of the fast phase. Also, notably, it counts both invaders and blight, and notably this counts explorers as well. So wider range of checking than England, but it tends to be a lot less punishing because of that fast phase check. You can do things, you can even like leave things at 8 invaders or blights during the slow phase, like at the end of the slow phase, and go between turns. But just keep in mind, you will have to deal with it at some point. It's just not as punishing as England. So that is the additional loss condition. Next, we have the escalation. So this escalation here, mining tunnels. After advancing invader cards, on each board, explore in 2 lands whose terrains don't match a ravage or build card with no source required. So that means if you've pocketed your board, like over here, right? Let's say you've taken away everything on this board except like the coastal jungle city, right? If you chose this sands and land number D7, you would still have to explore there, even though it doesn't have a source. And of course, this is also an explorer. So if you're playing with, like, this is phrased as an explorer, it's not add an explorer. So if you have an isolation, how isolations work is part of the text of isolate is invaders cannot explore. So if I isolate this land and I can still choose this land for this, say like I get an escalation where the advanced invader cards do not include a jungle, so like jungle is not on a ravager build card after advancing, then this isolation here, I can say, okay, I'm going to choose this as one of my escalation lands, and then it won't explore because the isolation just prevents all explorers, doesn't matter whether it has a source or not. Similarly, like even if you isolated a land with buildings, you could choose that land for the extra escalation explorer and not explore there. So isolation is particularly strong against the HME Escalation, and otherwise it's hard to prevent HME from like it's hard to fully clear HME's board because of this. You will always have some number of explorers on the board because of this escalation. So yeah, that is the additional loss condition and escalation. Those are the only things that are active at level 0. I'm not going to talk that much in detail about lower levels, or like as in like what it feels like to play a lower level of HME, because most of my play is at like level 6, so that's what most of my experience is. Also some level 5. I'll go into the difference between those two, definitely. But like this escalation will definitely make the game harder, even at level 0. I think you're not going to need to worry that much about the additional loss condition at level 0, probably. But yeah. Okay, so moving on. Level 1. This is the one that like really defines HME. This is what HME is always about, and like usually this is pretty true for adversaries. So what you get is two things. First, Avarice rewarded. When Blight added by a Ravage action would cascade. Instead, you upgrade an explorer or town, so into respectively a town or a city, before the Dahan counterattack. So that might cause your Dahan counterattack to go less well. For example, like if you Blight on top of a Blight with like explorer, town, Dahan, right? Let's just like visualize that, like something that looks like this. If this ravages, then it'll Blight again, and this will cause an upgrade. So this will, killing a Dahan, this will cause an upgrade before this Dahan counterattacks. So like you can upgrade the explorer into a town, and then the Dahan kills the town, or you upgrade the town into a city, and then this Dahan has trouble killing anything. So keep that in mind. That happens before the Dahan counterattack. But this is mostly a positive thing for the spirits. Blight cascades can be pretty scary sometimes for letting Blight go out of control. So what this does is it just like makes it so that ravaging is less punishing on HME. Like whenever HME ravages, it's never going to add 2 Blight. It's always only going to add 1. And like instead it might upgrade some stuff, but that tends to be a bit easier to deal with than cascades. However, in addition to that, it's not all upside, as you might expect. You have ceaseless mining. Lands with 3 or more invaders are mining lands. This is very important. Many things care about mining lands on HME. In mining lands, disease and modifiers to disease affect ravage actions as though they were build actions. So a disease in a land with 3 invaders that's ravaging would prevent the ravage. But also, during the build step, build cards cause ravage actions instead of build actions. So that is referring to specifically this build step right here. Only this, nothing else. Like build cards here will cause ravage actions in mining lands instead of build actions. If you have high immigration from England, from like a double adversary, for example, this will not cause that to ravage. If you have a mining land that like an event says you build in that land, it will not cause a ravage. The only thing that this affects is what a build card does. So like this mountains right here will say, okay, mountains that are mining lands will ravage, and mountains that aren't mining lands will build. So yeah, that's what that does. And basically, what this means is that you're going to have a lot more ravages, but you're going to have a lot fewer builds, as you might expect. So when you say like have double explorer, right? This is something that happens a lot with HME because of HME 6, which I'll get to. But like this will build a town, right? Just as normal. But if you have 3 explorers, instead of building, it will ravage. So this will not build, it will instead ravage. And if you defend this, for example, let's say we came over here and put a defend 3 on this land. Well now, that's pretty positive for you, because this defend 3 means that the ravage doesn't do anything, and the Dahan also gets to counterattack, killing these explorers. And then the next turn, since like that was from the build card, on the next turn this explorer will ravage again. Because, you know, now the build card shifted to ravage. And a single explorer against Dahan, well, that just dies. So this often will feel like a downside. It will feel like the invaders are like, you know, being more aggressive. They're adding more blight. But actually, since they don't build, it is harder for them to get a foothold on the board. And therefore, and you can also like leverage Dahan even more. against HME than other adversaries because of the increased ravages. So it's not all downsides, and it's very important to keep that in mind, because if you don't, things might get out of control. If you don't like have this mindset of they're going to have less of a foothold but be more aggressive, so I need to be able to exploit that you might have more difficulty with the adversary, certainly. So level 2. This adds a fear card to Terror 3. I should mention this ends up at 454, which is just a very standard place for like fear cards to be. There's nothing special about this really. Like the fear cards are mostly just like what you would expect fear card progression to look like. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But yeah, this level 2 is purely setup, but it's very important setup. What it does is it adds an explorer to all the lands that don't have Dahan at the beginning. So this will be 4 different lands. Half of your board will have Dahan, half of them won't. And one thing to note is that on every single board will have 2 lands of each terrain type, and one of those lands will have Dahan, one of those lands will not have Dahan. So basically, you're guaranteed to, for each terrain type, have a land that has Dahan and a different land that has an explorer in it and no Dahan. So that's what the explorers do, and then the other part of it is that you add a disease and a city to your starting town land. So that would be this land here. You add a disease and a city. And what that does is, well, it doesn't actually, so I saw someone point this out on Discord, which is pretty neat, a pretty neat bit of design. It doesn't actually affect how the land naturally progresses, in a sense. Like, if you look at this land, right, you see city, town, disease. If this explores, then it goes to this, then the next turn it will build, and then since it's a mining land, but also like either way, if it's a mining land or not on the build card, the disease will prevent it. So you'll throw away this disease and that will prevent the ravage. And then on ravage, it will ravage as explore, town, city. So that's what happens with this setup. Without the setup, the exact same thing happens actually, because without the setup, you don't have this disease, you don't have the city, you explore, you build, and since there's a town here, it builds a city, and then you ravage as explore town city again. So actually adding the city and the disease technically doesn't do anything for just the purposes of this land's like initial cycle of like progression, right? What it does do is, first of all, it's one neat thing is that it shows off how mining lands work, because you'll see, oh, this is a mining land now. Maybe this mining land will be a threat from ravaging. But actually, no, the disease prevents that. That's pretty cool from a design perspective. But also from a gameplay perspective, the way that this makes the game harder is that there's now more inland buildings. So it's harder to get a pocket against HME because of this. You need to be able to clear this city, which is not that easy. Clearing a city in the early game can be pretty hard. That's like part of why there's like a city on land number 2, especially compared to clearing a town. And it just means that like you're gonna have a harder time pocketing your inlands because of this starting city. So that's something to note. Okay, so that's level 2. Level 3, mining boom. After the build step on each board, choose a land with explorers. Upgrade 1 explorer there. So remember how I said that from the level 1, you're not going to have as many builds. You're going to have more ravages and fewer builds. This is how HME will make up for that and still like keep adding buildings to the board. If HME didn't have this mining boom thing after the build step, then it would be a lot easier to prevent them from ever getting a foothold, because like it's a lot easier to prevent them from ever building any buildings by just like forcing them to ravage in mining lands. Instead, here, like this will be generating a town every turn because you choose a land with explorers and you upgrade that explorer. Notably, you have to do this like in a land with an explorer. So if your explorer is very inopportune, like if you've like cleared most of the explorers in your board, but you have this one lone explorer out here actually, let's say in this jungle, right? Like if your board looks like this, you actually might prefer if you had an explorer on the coast, because like just in addition to what you have, because this explorer when upgraded is going to unpocket fewer things. While if you upgrade this explorer, suddenly your whole board is exploring now because of this town. So that's something to keep in mind about mining boom. You need to choose a place with explorers, so plan around where your explorers are going to be. And this is especially important when we get to the next stage of HME, which I feel like is the second most defining part of it. So mining, we have the first level with mining lands, and now our level 4 will give us something that leverages those mining lands a lot more than just the ravage. So the normal deck looks like 1-1-1, so 3 level stage 1s, and then 4 stage 2s, and you might notice what's happening here, and then 5 stage 3s, right? HME 4 doesn't change this per se, in the sense that you still get 4 stage 4s and 5, like 3 stage 1s, 4 stage 4s, 5 stage 3s. But your second stage 2 card is guaranteed to be salt deposits. And this is a lot of information. You always know that this card is going to come right here as the 5th card. This is going to explore on turn 4, build on turn 5, and then ravage starting on turn 6. Notably, you don't have the coasts card once you have this HME level 4, because you remove it and like replace it with salt deposits essentially. And that can be like interesting. Like it makes Deep's Ocean slightly better, for example, because Deep's is a bit nerfed by the existence of a coastal card, because you often want to make more coastal lands, whereas against HME there's no coastal card. But the main thing about this is that this is a refill card. So similar to Habsburg, like the original Habsburg Livestock Colony, that one has a reminder card that comes actually basically at the same point, right? Habsburg's reminder card, I believe, comes right here, right? After you do after the 5th card of the deck, when you reveal it. So after this Explorer, it refills their board by adding 1 city and 3 towns. HME has something very similar in the Salt Deposits card, where this will be a refill because it explores all non-mining lands, and then it builds all non-mining lands. So this is all lands with 2 or fewer invaders. It will explore all of them, and then it will build all of them on the build space, and then on the ravage space, it will ravage in all mining lands. And then it won't advance, so it will stay there, and from that turn on, every single turn, you're going to ravage all mining lands in addition to any ravages that happen. So this is quite defining. This is like what gives like HME 4 and above like its flow of gameplay generally. Like generally how it'll go is HME has like a bit of power here at the start, because you I should actually start this graph lower. Like if I draw out a graph here, right? Like the x-axis is time and the y-axis is like how much threat HME presents. It is a bit threatening at the start, just because of the initial explorers and like how HME 6 works, which I'll get to that. And then it starts dropping off as you start clearing lands, as lands start ravaging, and they don't quite really build back. But then it hits the Salt Deposits card, and the Salt Deposits card starts refilling things. It will explore everywhere that isn't a mining land, so all your small lands will explore, and then all your small lands will build, and then all of your lands will start ravaging, and then that's going to ramp up the difficulty quite a bit, and the intensity quite a bit. And then you'll get to the point where you're also double ravaging, which is where HME starts hitting its peak. You're ravaging on your Salt Deposits, and you're also ravaging on your other card. And then finally, the spirits will be able to come back from this generally. Like if you make it past this hump, you're good. And this is just generally how the pace of the game goes, where you at the start, if it pressures you a bit, make sure that you're like doing stuff to deal with it. Then there's a bit of a lull, and as it starts refilling from Salt Deposits until it ramps to its final state of like it's never going to be quite as like late game as England, but this initial rush can be quite scary. This rush like right after the Salt Deposits card, so you need to be prepared for that. This ravage all mining lands is also very important. So I'm going to spend a lot of time here just going over how do you mitigate this? How do you deal with this play pattern from HME? How do you best exploit the fact that you know when the salt deposits card is coming. You always know this is when it's hitting. It's not like the Russia bomb, where the Russia bomb, like, you have some control, but like it can be pretty hard to control when the Russia fear bombs come down, and you also don't know what lands they're going to hit. HME, you always know what it's doing. So the biggest thing, in my opinion, is to prevent the builds. So Salt Explore, whatever, you're not going to be able to prevent Assault Explorer very much, just because, like, yes, you can pocket, but it's going to be hard to pocket because of this initial town city, right? It's just going to be a bit hard to invest resources into making that pocket, and that would, in fact, pocket for the salt deposits. But like mining boom is also working against your pocket. It's going to be hard to like prevent HME from building anywhere. It's going to be probably easy to prevent HME from building in more than one land, but the mining boom will always represent a build, so it's just kind of hard to pocket against HME. So instead, you're just going to have to like take for granted the fact that HME is probably going to explore every land. Notably, Isolate is again quite good here, because while you can't prevent buildings from existing that easily, you can isolate buildings that are already there a lot easier. Like if you just like make sure that your buildings are like you have like one inland land with buildings, just isolate that land, and suddenly you're cutting off 3 different explorers, because like this is isolated, so can't explore, and then your land 6 and land 8 here don't have sources. So yeah, the Isolate can be very powerful against the Salt card for this reason. And also, of course, you can just do the classic isolate an empty land. It doesn't explore, it won't build, like that, just like that. That will help as well. Because HME does not have anything that like builds in empty lands or like makes empty lands like harder to deal with. So isolating is a strategy. Pocketing, less of a strategy. But the most important thing, I think, is control strategies. When I say control, what I mean is like either just the classic control of pushing invaders around, or even just the control of like doing very like small explorer pings in order to manage your very small lands, and making sure that your like built-up lands have enough invaders. And what I mean by this is, notably, before this Salt explores, so this Salt is about to explore, right? If every single land either has 2 or more invaders, so like say like we have a bunch of different lands that can happen, right? You have the 0 invader land right here, the 1 invader land here, 2 invader land, 3 invader land, right? These are various different numbers that can matter. Like if there's more than 3, it's the same as 3 for the purposes of how salt deposits interact. So when salt deposits explores, you're going to explore in all of your non-mining lands. So you won't explore in your 3 invader lands. Then the next turn is going to build in all of your non-mining lands. So now this land that started with 2 will not build, because now it has 3 after the explore. So you've just prevented a build just by having 2 invaders in a land. So that's pretty powerful. So you're going to build in these 2 lands. And then you're going to ravage in your mining lands. Notably, this land doesn't ravage because it only has 2 invaders. It can still like get explored from other sources, like the Explorer card that comes after your Assault build. But and that will be a stage 2 card, so you'll need to explore in 4 different lands because of the Escalation. But like this won't ravage, which is nice. But even nicer is the fact that after it explores, it's only a single explorer, and you can deal with that single explorer. There's a lot of ways to deal with a single explorer. You can, for example, leave it up to chance from a beast event and get far ahead from that. You can just deal 1 damage, kill the explorer. You can push the explorer. One especially potent thing I found is if after the Salt Explorer you have these lands that like you know, there's a 1 invader land and a 2 invader land, just push the 1 invader into the 2 invader land. Now it's at 3. Now you've just stopped 2 builds with 1 push, and that's extremely powerful. Like this will still ravage and be a problem on the Salt Ravages turn, but in general I found the strongest way to deal with HME is to prevent those builds. Make it so that they don't progress their material very much. They just pressure you a bit on ravages and like mining boom every turn. But like as long as you stop those builds, it'll be very, very like relaxing to deal with in my experience. So that's a lot about salt cards. Basically, what you want to engineer is on the build turn, you have a bunch of 3s and 0s. Lands with 3 invaders that won't build and lands with 0 invaders that also won't build. And the way to do that is to start with lands with 0s and 2s and 3s. Right? The 3s won't explore, the 2s will explore into 3s, and the 0s will explore into 1s that you can then push into other 2s to make into 3s. So that is like the most important takeaway for HME, in my opinion, that you can do this manipulation with the salt card, that you can manipulate it so much in your favor, that like I think a lot of times people will just like will not think too hard about like what the strategy is here, right? And just assume, oh, it's going to explore and build in a lot of places, it's going to ravage in a lot of places. There's nothing I can do to stop it. But there's actually a lot you can do. There's so much agency you have here, which is why I think that's part of why I think this difficulty should be a bit lower. But like I understand why it is this high, because I think this is a somewhat unintuitive part. But like I think in terms of like absolute like how hard is this at optimal play, which is a weird statement to make, I guess. It actually is a lot more manipulatable than you might expect. So now we get to HME 5. This is Mining Boom Level 2. Instead of the first Mining Boom, which is just upgrading Explorer, after build step, you Mining Boom 2, which is choose a land with explorers still, and you still upgrade the explorer, but first you build. So what that means, so some very common things. At the start, you'll have all of these single explorer lands, right? So a very common thing for you to do is to choose one of these lands and build there and upgrade, which will turn it into double town. So single explorer goes to double town. Notably, if you have Explorer Town, then that goes to like town city, because you build a city and then you upgrade a town. Generally, with Mining Boom, with this version of Mining Boom, I have 2 big pieces of advice. First of all, don't use up a disease. Disease can prevent, specifically early, I guess. When you get to the Salt Deposits card, disease will be very important for giving you a bit of breathing room at the start. Like if you have, like for example, this land will explore from mining from the salt card, and then it won't build because it's at 3 invaders, and then the first Salt Ravage will eat this disease instead of actually ravaging. And that can be very important for giving you a bit of breathing room, so you can like deal with 2 lands on the Salt Ravage card and then deal with like 3 lands when it's double ravaging both Salt and something else. So try not to use up disease for this Mining Boom Level 2. Second tip, try not to build cities. Like I said, one thing that HME is bad at as an adversary is it's not very good at getting a foothold. The more cities you let it build, the more of cities are a lot harder to deal with than towns and explorers. So the more you let it build cities, the more it will be harder to clear those lands, to cut them down to below mining land status. And at some point you really want to limit the number of mining lands in your on your board because of this Salt Deposits card. And the final tip I have for Mining Boom is use this to manage your Salt Deposits card. For example, let's say this is what the board looks like when Salt Deposits is about to explore. That's not very realistic because this is just the starting configuration, but let's say this is the starting board, Actually, I'll put 2 explorers together just to have maybe a bit of a better example. Actually, I'll even put this explorer here. Okay, let's say this is the Mining Boom turn, right? We're about to explore Salt Deposits, and we need to decide which land do we Mining Boom. Well, we have 3 choices. We can Mining Boom in this wetlands, we can Mining Boom in this jungle, or we can Mining Boom in the sands. I think, so first of all, by far the worst choice is the sands, because it has this disease, and this disease will cause ravage. Let's say there's this disease that still isn't here. You might think, oh, well, I might want to mining boom in the sands because like it's already pretty built up. I can just like skip it maybe, or like, you know, I might hammer it with a large major later. It's going to be hard to deal with it, making it like slightly hard to deal with, slightly like harder to deal with isn't going to cost me that much compared to like making a land that's not going to be a problem into a problem. However, the problem with that way of thinking is that these lands right here are actually going to be problems already from salt deposits. And what mining boom in these two lands does is it minimizes how much the salt deposits card does. For example, if you mining boom in this jungle, one thing I really love to do right before the salt card is mining boom to turn one explorer, like a lone explorer, into 2 towns. And that might seem strange, like, you know, this land wasn't a problem, now it's a problem. Why am I doing that? Well, it's because after it explores from salt deposits, it's not going to build because it's at 3 invaders now. You mining boom it from 1 to 2, and then it explores up to 3, and then it doesn't build. And what this means is, consider what happens if I don't mining boom, right? If I don't mining boom, then it explores and explore, and then if I don't deal with that, we'll build a town, and then I'm basically at the same point, right? Like, it's still going to ravage for 4 instead of 5. The only difference is this explorer upgrade. So I've basically eaten the mining boom build by directing it at a land that was going to build anyways. I wasn't going to be able to stop this build except by making it have 3 invaders for salt deposits. Similarly, for a 2 explorer land, if I turn this explorer into 2 towns, right, then it won't explore. That's worse, certainly, because like, you know, the natural course of things if I let this explore from salt deposits is that it explores with a 3rd explorer, and then these 3 explorers won't build, but they will ravage. But it's only ravaging for 3. So this is definitely worse, I think, of a play pattern. But it still doesn't prevent an explorer, because compared to 3 explorers, you'll have explorer, town, town, right? And you've roughly, like, usually mining boom turns 1 explorer into 2 towns. In this case, you're kind of turning 2 explorers into 2 towns because you prevent the explorer from salt deposits. But basically, the main takeaway here is if you can help it, if you ever have like a single explorer before salt deposits, mining boom it, and then your life will be so much easier. It'll look strange in the moment, but it will pay off when you just have fewer builds to deal with. It's just so much better than mining booming anything else, generally. And as a caveat, that specifically if you don't have a plan already to deal with this double explorer, like if you could already deal with this double explorer, like dealing 2 damage to it, then probably don't mining boom it. Like, it's stronger to have an empty land that's not building than a mining land that's not building. But otherwise, strongly consider that mining boom. I will say, mining boom is a very interesting dynamic part of HME that I do like design-wise. However, one thing I don't like about it is that I'm very bad at remembering it. It's like France 6. It's like after the build step or after the explore step, right? There's an extra thing you have to do each time. And each time I'm raring to see the explorer like go to slow, so I might miss it. But yeah, just keep that in mind. It's a more easily missable thing. Finally, and this one is also very interesting. I think a lot of people tend to not like this level. I think it is mechanically interesting, but it can feel bad sometimes. This is specifically the Empire Ascendant. During setup and during the Explore step on boards with 3 or fewer blight, so you have to get to 4 blight to turn this off. Add +1 Explorer in each land successfully explored, max 2. So, during setup means during the setup explore. So during this first explore, this first explorer's mountains, let me like bring this back to what it looks like on setup, which I believe looks like this. So during setup, this mountains will double explore instead of single exploring. And the main thing that makes this like very interesting is that puts a lot of pressure on ravaging at the beginning, because as you might notice, usually the explorer looks like this opening explorer, right? And then both of them are going to build and then they're going to ravage. But instead, once you add a second explorer to both of them, now this mountain is going to ravage instead of building. So this will immediately add a blight, and then it'll blight next turn as well, assuming you don't deal with it. And that's a lot of blight pressure. At least it doesn't cascade. That's why HME doesn't cascade. So this double explore can be quite brutal. If you're a control spirit, you're going to have a harder of a time preventing lands from building, because like 2 explorers is a lot harder to explore to control than 1. Similarly, if you're like a spirit that relies on 1 damage pings, I don't think there's that many of those, but if you can think of any. Also, like, just, I don't know, I guess fangs. It'll just push you a lot more towards wanting to defend, towards wanting to like have early defense against these triple explorers. But you do have this choice of you can take 4 blight, right? Or 3 blight, because your board starts with 1. A very natural play pattern is like if you just let the first couple turns play out, right? You double explore in these 2 mountains, then you'll blight here, right? From the build, and you build here, and then you're going to blight in both of them, and then you're up to 4 blight suddenly, right? Very quickly, you've turned off the HME 6. This can be different if you like, explore into one of your starting building lands, like lands with buildings and disease, but you can always, like, because of the blight pressure, HME 6 also turns itself off quite quickly if you want. So that's always something interesting to keep in mind. It really is somewhat spirit dependent. I tend to favor going for 4 blight, but like in a multiplayer game, you probably want to have some number of boards take 4 blight and some number of boards try to take like 0 blight. Because that will just, like, it's bad for a board to take 3 blight. Exactly 3 blight, because like you're both not turning off HME 6 and you've taken a bunch of blight. So keep that in mind. And of course, keep in mind that this is max 2 lands per board per explore card. So if you have a doubled explore card from like an event, for example, that like delays the normal explore, then you would in fact get 2 per explore card. If it's a stage 3, you only get 2 total, not the whole 4. Though usually by stage 3, you've either like solidly won or turned off to HME 6. And also keep in mind this does not apply to Escalation or any other additional sources of explorers. It's only in lands that are being explored by explore cards. During the explore step technically, but I don't think there's ways for things that aren't explore cards to add explorers during the explore step, because the main thing with this escalation is that it happens after advancing invader cards. So yeah, it's only going to be +2 explorers per turn, but depending on your spirit, you might really want to turn that off fast. Another note about this, one thing that this does is it slightly pushes spirits towards wanting to take the early turns off to scale. So if you already have this incentive to want to get to 4 blight, right? If you have a spirit that like can scale very well, you'll be rewarded even more by like taking this early blight in order to scale, in order to be prepared for this salt deposits card. So that's something to take note of. And speaking of the salt deposits card, I should also mention, with the if you do have HME 6 still activated when Salt explores, you do get quite a lot of control over this, right? Like if you have, say, lands that look like this, right? You have a bunch of lands with like 2 invaders and 1 invader. You can say, oh, I'm going to double explore in this wetlands. I'm going to double explore in this mountains, and then I'm going to single explore in all my other non-mining lands. And then now suddenly you've gotten to that state I talked about before, where you have these triple invader lands, right? This mountain, this jungle, the sands, this wetlands. You use your double explorers in order to get those up to 3 invaders, so that it doesn't build next turn. And then the other lands you all explored only once. Again, coordinating lands to have exactly 3, or just 1. So that can be pretty nice. So keep in mind, it's not always a downside. Again, HME, I think HME is very interesting because there's a lot of things that are just not always downsides. And it's important to recognize when you can leverage those, when you can like get these small incidental value, points of value to like just delay those builds. I think the most important thing against HME is delay those builds. So yeah, that's most of HME. is there anything else I want to add? I should mention, because I somehow haven't mentioned it yet, defense is very strong against HME. Another way that this level 6 Empire Ascendant can be good for you is that it forces HME to ravage a lot more. And like I said, preventing those builds is very good. So like if you have the single explorer land, right, if with HME turned on, it double explores into 3 explorers. And if you can just find some cheap defense, some like very low opportunity cost defense, just to defend 2 even. Like, for example, bargains of power and protection, or the existence of Hearth Vigil. Like this land just solves itself. It'll explore like this, and then it'll on Ravage it clears itself. Sorry, not even on Ravage. On build it clears itself from ravaging. It's not even going to Ravage. So that's a very, very powerful way to deal with HME. Just prevent their builds. As always, just always prevent their builds. So yeah, that is HME in a nutshell. I hope this was a useful and comprehensive look at HME. I might also, I think I'm planning on doing some number of videos that are talking about 6/6 combinations involving HME, because I think that would also be something that's pretty interesting. Part of my inspiration for making this video was just like realizing that there wasn't really any content out there talking about specifically HME strategy, especially because like the playtesters have an embargo on like making content about NI, and like people haven't played that much against HME yet. And it's a fairly complex adversary. So I wanted to get this out there, and I was thinking I have some experience with 6/6 as well. I might do that. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.